So recently I've been watching some footage from the game Don't Starve, and there's a companion or pet or whatever you want to call it, a ghost called Abigail. And I thought it'd be kind of interesting to show you how to make a character like Abigail. Now, it's interesting to note that Don't Starve uses 2D assets, but in a 3D environment. Like if you ever rotate the camera, you'll notice that you really don't see a different side of the various objects, such as the trees or whatever. Everything rotates so it continually faces the camera. So they're 2D assets, but using essentially a 3D environment. So let's take a look at how you would do this. Now, a good chunk of the work is actually done externally. What you have to do is you have to draw the individual cells in some kind of external paint program. I use Anime Studio Pro. I don't think the newer versions are called that anymore. They renamed it Moho or something like that. I have no idea why. Maybe there's some meaning to the word that I'm missing. I thought Anime Studio Pro was a perfectly self-explanatory name. But anyways, you'll save those to an external folder, and it's just a matter of transferring them or copying them into the asset area. So you just do a group select, and just drag them in. Now, when you're in a 3D environment, if you bring in a 2D image by default, okay, if you click on one of these, it's a texture. In this case, we actually don't want it to be a texture. We're going to use it to be a sprite. So the difference is the texture gets wrapped around a 3D object, or at very least put onto a plane, but the sprite is it uses a sprite renderer component as opposed to a material component. So that's probably a better way of saying it, is that a texture is part of a material, whereas a sprite is part of a sprite renderer. So just highlight all these, same thing, click on one, hold shift, click on the other, so typical Windows navigation. Come up to texture type and change that down to sprite. And then you can just click on apply. Now here's your camera, and it's looking along this axis. So the camera is at 0, 1, -10. I'm just going to take one of these, drag it in to get a sense of whether it's the proper size or not. So just going to drag that in, and it looks like it's actually huge already. So 0, 1, -10. This is 0, 0, 0, so it's 10 units away from the camera. So let's move it a little bit closer. Yeah, Abigail is fairly large. So you can delete that because that was just for testing purposes. Highlight all of them, and you want to change where it says pixels per unit. Now this is going to sound counterintuitive. The bigger the number, the smaller the image. And the reason for that is because it's a ratio. And that is 1 pixel of this versus 1 unit of unity, is a unity unit. So to make this smaller, the image gets bigger. To make it bigger, the image gets smaller. So let's do like 140. And do apply. Now, if I'd left that image there, it would have automatically shrunk because that object was using this as a source. So that one again, so it's at 0, 0. We'll move it a little bit closer. Again, we'll put it at like -3. And yeah, that's a much more reasonable size. All right, go ahead and delete that. Now we're going to create the object. So game object, create empty, rename it Abigail. Click on Abigail. And what you're going to do is up here where it says animation. If it's not here, you're going to need to right-click your tab and choose Add Tab. But for me, animation is here, so I want to click on animation. Now, this is something that I like about version 5X that the 4X versions didn't do. Every once in a while, I'd click on an object, I'd drag and drop the images, and it would put the animation on the wrong object. This one explicitly gives you a message saying you're about to begin animating Abigail. So this word right here is the object you have selected. So this is your this is basically letting you know, have you truly selected the right object. So you go ahead and click on create. And you need to name it. So let's call it idle. Now, if you have a really large program, you're not going to want to ever just use the word idle because lots of characters and enemies will have idle. So you're really going to want to say, if the name is Jack, then idle Jack. If it's Abigail, it's idle Abigail. And you probably want to put the idle first because it'll let you sort easier by all your idle animations. Or maybe you want the name of the character first. That way you can sort by all the characters, like using the example Jack. Jack idle, Jack jumping, Jack running, whatever. So your choice. I'm just using idle because we're only going to have one animation, but I just want to let you know that if you're going to have multiple animations, you should give a name that's much more descriptive. So we'll choose save, and you now see the timeline up here. It defaults to 60. We don't need the frame rate to be that high. We'll make it like, let's start with like 16 and see how that looks. There's only 12 frames, so if we did it 12 frames per second, then this entire sequence would take a full second to animate, and that would probably look terrible. Again, this is not etched in stone. As you saw, it was that easy to change. So again, just select all, drag it up there, and it does 1 per time segment. We sliced it into 16, so each one of these is 1/16 of a second. If you need more space or less space, when you're pointing here, you can just zoom in and out with the scroll wheel. Okay, so the problem is that's it playing forward because this is the little, at the bottom, moving up, and now we need them to move back down. So what you need to do is you need to repeat the frame. So we're going to zoom out so we have more space. Just to know that zooming does not change the frame rate. That's just for display purposes in here. So let's just go ahead and drag these in one at a time. Now what this does, so it starts with this frame, goes all the way out to this frame, comes all the way back. You don't need to repeat this first frame because when the animation ends, it comes back to the first frame. So unless you want it to pause at the ends, then yes, you can repeat the frame. Otherwise, you don't want to repeat the frame. All right, so let's go back to scene. And now that by default will animate. Not readily evident, but you can see the bottom is moving. So let's move that just a little bit closer to the camera so it's a little bit easier to see. There we go. All right, so now the second aspect to Abigail is she actually casts light beneath her. She's a very minor light source. So to do that, we really need something underneath her. So let's go to Game Object, 3D Object. You can either choose a cube or a plane. Let's do a cube because planes have some troublesome aspects to them. Not wrong, just I won't get into it in this one, but there's some attributes that can cause issues. So let's make scale 10. Doesn't need to be very tall, so 0.1. And 10. Okay, so now this cube is at 0, 0, 0. Abigail is at 0, 0, negative 2, 7. So we actually want to put the cube underneath. And actually, at the moment, we can't see Abigail. There we go. So you can see that she's just barely going through the bottom there. So let's move this down a little bit more. The reason why you don't see Abigail is because there's no default sprite. So you could just put a placeholder here, which is fine, and now you can see her. because what's going on is the animation will override the sprite. So I could put whatever image I want here, but if you have an animation, it will override the image. But now we can, for placeholder reasons, we can now, or should I say for placement reasons, we can now see. All right, so let's take that cube, and we're going to quickly just give it a darker material so it's easier to see that it's light. So go to Create, Material, and we'll call this Ground Matte. So in your game, it would probably be an actual sprite, like so it'd be the ground. Not getting into that kind of detail. I'm just really showing her and how she affects the environment around her. So let's make that a fairly dark gray. And now you could just drag and drop that right onto your object. So you didn't need to highlight it like that. You could just drag it onto the object. So now you can see the gray underneath her. All right. So now let's raise her up just a little bit. I already lowered the ground. We'll raise her up now. Like I said, she casts light. So what you want to do is you want to add a light to her. And you can either have it kind of bob up and down a little bit for effect, or you can just have it stay at a static level. But ultimately, we're going to link it to her. So game object, light, spotlight. You could already see a little bit of light there. So if we raise that up, okay. And now, Abigail, we said, is at 0.26, negative 278. So 0. Now this is, to make this work, you probably need it to be above her. There's a couple ways to get around that. So we'll keep it, and it's also important to note that the pivot point is the center. So if you're using the same point, you really want it to be above her anyways. So let's make it 1, and we said for Z, it's negative 278. And there you go. You now have light under her. Now it depends how much light. It's not very effective because you can see the skybox. It's not very dark, but you can indeed see there's a light. So you can change some attributes of this light. For instance, its range, as well as the spot angle. So like, for instance, it's 30. You increase it, and now she's lighting a larger area. And that's all game balance. How much light do you want her to give? Now let's just make this a little bit bigger, the cube, just so it's a little bit, there's less distraction. We can see less of the background. Yeah, that's a little bit better. And like I said, if you want, you can have, say, the camera moving up and down, but she's not actually moving up and down. It looks like she is, but that's really just the animation. So the object is actually in a static location. Now, what we're going to do is you take the spotlight, drag and drop it onto Abigail. See how there's that triangle there? That's showing that Abigail is the parent and the spotlight is the child. So if you move Abigail, the light moves with her. Now, one more thing. When she attacks, or maybe when she's being attacked, she flashes red. So that would actually take some coding. At this point, we haven't done really any coding. We've just used the UI to make things work. So for coding, we're going to right-click, Create, C#, and we'll call this Abigail Con for control. Click on Abigail, drag and drop, open that up. You can either double click here or double click here. I'm going to zoom in by holding Control and zooming on the scrolling on the scroll wheel on the mouse. Now, you would use like a collision or something like that. For the purposes of this demonstration, since we don't have any objects to collide with her, I'm just going to use the mouse button. Triggering it isn't the big deal. What I'm trying to show you is how you change her color. So in the update section, we're going to do if, and we're going to look for input from the player, and we're going to do get button down, and I believe we can just do fire 1 for the mouse. Whoops. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what just happened. I know what's happening. I missed the quote. Sorry about that. So it's quote, fire 1, quote, parenthesis, parenthesis. There we go. So I think it was adding plus signs and quotes because it was thinking I was trying to concatenate something to this. That is, I was trying to add something to it. Okay, so if there is input and it's the fire 1 button being pressed, what do we want to do? We want to use good old GetComponent. What component? Sprite renderer. See, this is Abigail. Abigail is selected, and there's the sprite renderer component. So you're literally grabbing this name. These are called components, and that's the sprite renderer component. This is the color attribute here. Let me move the script so you don't think I'm insane. So sprite renderer, color. So we're literally going to drill down just like it says. Watch. So sprite renderer, just like it says there in the inspector. And then color, just like it says there. And then it's going to be equals new color. And it's going to be red, so 100%, so 1. And we want there to be no green, no blue, and we're not going to mess with the alpha. So there's actually a fourth variable there if you, or a fourth value there if you want, and it changes translucence. Let's see if it works. There we go. So, like I said, for you, when you put this into a game, you're not going to use this statement. But what you are going to do is you're going to take this and embed this into whatever condition you're using, such as a collision condition or something else. So that's how you change the color. So I think that's about it. I suppose I could show her moving so you see that the light does move with her. So let's quickly do that. So for Abigail, add component, physics, rigid body. We're not going to use gravity. This allows for, as you saw the menu say, the application of physics. Which aspect of it? Specifically, mass, drag, velocity, gravity. And of those, the ones that we are concerned with for this demonstration, or at least this part of the demonstration, is velocity. So, let's go to the script, and now we're going to do this the proper way, as I mentioned a moment ago. Public, key code, and we'll call this move forward. Calling it moving forward does not make any impact on the functionality. Calling it move forward is for you, the designer, for your benefit, so that you know what this key press does, what this variable does. So we save that. We've got Abigail selected, which is the object the script is attached to. Here's the script, and here's that new key code. We'll use W just for typical WASD control. And now we'll do another if input. So if input, oops, try that again. Input dot get key down, and it's the variable move forward. So no quotes, just the variable. And again, we're going to use GetComponent. This time it's the rigid body component. and it is the velocity attribute equals new vector 3, and we're going to have it move 0 horizontally, 0 vertically, but we're going to have it move in a positive direction, so we'll say 3 velocity. And that should about do it, if I didn't mess anything out. So I'm going to press W, and there she goes. And as you can see, the light does indeed move with her. Okay, so I think that's about it. In about 20 minutes or so, I showed you a rough cut of how to make a companion like Abigail. I didn't show you the actual drawing. That's really beyond the scope of this because that's an entirely different program. Okay, so either you'd be commissioning that from someone or you would be doing that in a program that you're familiar with. And so that's the images get put into an animation sequence, and you attach the script for the purposes of movement and changing color. And I think that's about it. So if you have any questions, just let me know. I'm just going to save my work here, and we'll just call this Abigail, just in case anyone wants to see any kind of follow-up to this. And then what you'll see is down here, it says Abigail. So typically you don't save a character as a scene, but this is just like a one shot, so it's okay in this case. Typically a scene would be like an entire level from a side scroller, or within a survival horror game, if it gets loaded one room at a time, each room would be a scene, that kind of thing. All right, so that should do it.